Images of modern examples of those woodland. This is W16 sessile oak wood. This is on stiperstones, and so that's what I would have expected to see high up on the hilltops on either side. This is W10 sessile oak, and this is on the Arkle, and this is what I think your wood is very much like this now. Actually, I think if you look at the bracken on the forest floor, the size of those sessile oaks, I think that's pretty much what you've got actually. And then cottonwood forest, this is black poplar. This is what I'm saying, I'm convinced there would have been black poplar forests. But the Americans call it cottonwood because of the female, the fruits that come off the female trees. But we've almost eliminated black poplar. And a possible project, of course, is to re-establish some. And right by the River Red Lake, I would have expected alder woodland of the sort that we would get in Downton Gorge. So those are the sorts of woodland I think you would have got. Oh, here's some more alder woodland with some lovely bird cherry. That's in North Shropshire. Those are the sorts of woodlands I think you would have got. But then humans arrived and immediately started changing things. And we know humans got here early because of the Hissington Axe Factory. Now, there's an early change, and nobody really knows what caused it for certain. 6,500 to 5,500 years ago, before the present, it's called the Great Elm Decline. And suddenly in the pollen record, elms start disappearing, replaced by ash largely. What was that due to? Maybe it was Dutch elm disease, an early outbreak, but also probably early human activities, the change from Mesolithic way of life to Neolithic way of life, may well have had an impact on elms, that maybe they were preferentially felled or something was going on. Humans reduced elms early on. It could have just been disease, nobody really knows. Then getting into the early Bronze Age, we've got another period where one particular tree species disappeared. Now we were saying maybe limes don't do well in the valley at the moment, but I think they will have done in the early Bronze Age when the weather was warmer. But then there came the great Tilia decline. Tilia is lime trees. And this is very rapid, and what the pollen record shows is that within 30 years of humans arriving in an area, the lime has been cleared out. Now, either it was on the best soils that people wanted for farming, or it had some product that people really want, maybe the bast underneath the bark for making ropes or sandals. But lime disappears quickly after humans arrived. Elm seemed to have another phase of decline again. Ash and birch increased. Grass and herbs increased, telling us that the woodland is being cleared. And at this time, it was shifting cultivation. Woodlands cleared, farmed for 100 years ago, and then humans moved on and cleared again. Late Bronze Age, more extensive deforestation. I can't say exactly what happened in the valley here. I don't think there's specific evidence, but this is what happened generally in the marches. So all the main tree species are declining. And then we get into the Iron Age, and now we have much more extensive clearance, and it's reckoned between 1/3 and 1/2 of the marches was deforested. Most of the fertile areas were deforested, so probably your valley bottom here would have been deforested even if the hilltops hadn't. And there's crop plants in the pollen record, there's extensive agriculture. Late Iron Age, this business of the pines disappearing, not reappearing until they were replanted much later, and the only tree species that persist are the ones that can tolerate coppicing. And then finally, from 2,000 years ago to now, I think we have to accept there's little or no natural woodland in the Red Lake Valley or anywhere else in the marches because of human influences. So how much woodland is there currently in the marches? This is a Forestry Commission map that I got them to prepare some time ago. The dark green is coniferous woodland, the pale green is broadleaved, and this is the southern marches. And just to orientate ourselves, here's Wenlock Edge. You see that 30-mile long, or is it 30 kilometres? 30-kilometre long wooded scarp. So we're down here. And so what are the main woodland types around here? Well, mainly coniferous. So most of the woodland, in terms of overall area, is this initiative from the 20th century onwards of coniferisation. And I don't know, but I think maybe, is that your wood there? I think I've got a magnified version. I think that's your wood there. I think that's Brunedin wood there. And these are big conifer plantations. You'll know this area much better than me, and you'll recognise which sites those are. So we do have some broadleaf woodland, but currently there's more coniferous woodland. That's what we've got at the moment. And overall, this is about the most wooded part of the Marches, but even so, only a minority of the land is wooded. Compare with the rest of Europe, we're not very well wooded at all. There's an aerial view, and I think that's Bucknell. It's the danger of coming into an area and telling people what things are as they say, oh no, that's not Bucknell. Is that Bucknell?
Yeah.
Somebody reassure me? Yeah. Bucknell Hill, the map says that is Bucknell Wood, and there Brunedin Wood. Am I right? I'm right. So we're just tucked down in the valley there. So that's the lovely Red Lake Valley. And it's pretty much all grassland in that photo to me. So looking to the future, I've just got 10 minutes left. Looking to the future, I hope you're not going to get angry with some of the things that I'm going to say. I am going to be a little bit controversial, because what does the future hold in terms of woodland? I think the future for your woodland is very bright, because you're keen to look after it well and to improve it and ensure that it goes right on into the future. But there are some significant problems with woodland, as I'm sure you know. And so the first problem, that's that wych elm tree I showed you some time ago, but so many elms have turned into this. I remember it as a boy in the 1970s, elms disappearing over just a few years. And so we're still in the situation where elms, most of them, when they get to a certain size, get the beetle that carries the fungus that causes the Dutch elm disease. So we struggle with elms. They tend not to get to a big size. Ash, I'm not going to go through all the diseases here, but here's the most recent worry. Ash dieback. Young ashes are mostly succumbing to ash dieback disease. It's probably been here for 15 years, longer than people thought, but it makes it very hard for youngest ashes to establish now. And there are other things in the wings. Emerald ash borer in the United States and is in parts of Europe, which would be devastating. So we have ash disease, and then even among the conifers that we plant, we have problems, and there's the Phytophthora ramorum is causing big problems in larch, especially in South Wales and the West Country. And so there's a whole bunch of pests and diseases that are attacking native and non-native trees, making it very hard to know what to plant. And so what I want to just think about for a few minutes is, what should we, if we're establishing new woodland, if we say there isn't enough woodland, we need to establish new woodland, whatever should we be planting? Because almost anything you think of is threatened by some pest or disease. Now this is our own family wood, and this compartment here is Japanese larch. And 2 summers ago we had the whole lot felled to preempt Phytophthora ramorum, to preempt the larch disease. And the question then arose, what should we replant? That patch of our wood isn't an ancient woodland site. It was only planted in the 1950s. So we're free to plant anything, really. If it was ancient woodland site, I would certainly stick to natives. So out came all the larch. It was lovely timber, went off to Bishop's Castle, to the sawmill there, and we're left with a north-facing slope. What should we plant? Any native I can think of is threatened by pests and diseases. Not only that, we've got roe deer, grey squirrels, rabbits and bank voles, all of which want to eat every single tree that I plant. So the odds are stacked against me in establishing. Forestry Commission says I've got to establish 1,500 trees on this bank in the next 5 years. And all these things are stacked against me. So what was my solution? Well, my solution was to plant as many different species of tree as possible, including species from abroad. I think we've got too few trees in Britain because of the last glaciation. Because of human effects, they're now too vulnerable to pests and diseases. I want to put in as much diversity as possible so that something will grow and form a forest. And so this is me importing seed from the United States, native seed from the United States. This is hickories. which make wonderful handles for axes and garden tools. And you see I had to pay custom fees to import this. They're all lovely clean seeds, so they've been checked for phytosanitary health. And I'm trying to germinate these things. I'm trying to plant over 100 different tree species, one in every single family that has trees in it on my slope there in Shropshire. But I don't know how many Daily Mail readers we've got in the audience, but they got a sniff of this. They got a sniff of this, and the Daily Mail was furious that this Shropshire man was planting alien trees. What's wrong with good British trees? It's a disgrace. So anyway, here's the first. It wasn't the first, but I'm saying this is the first tree going in. There I am planting a walnut, a black walnut, which are threatened by pests and diseases. Family Juglandaceae, and I've carried on planting. They're all dying now, of course, because the weather's so hot and I can't water them. But I've planted 200 already. I think I've planted 50 different species. I just want some rain. I'm praying for rain to keep them alive. So that's my solution on this 3-acre slope in Shropshire. To plant, it's a big experiment, plant a huge diversity of trees and hope that I get some growing to form woodland. Now, another threat, which I think we need to consider, is of course the changing climate. Who knows whether this heat wave is natural? We had something similar in '76. It feels awfully hot to me. Now, is this just coincidental, or is it due to what we're doing to the planet? And I'm sure you know all about the CO2 story. Now, that graph I showed you earlier, in the natural cycle over the last 700,000 years, the highest the carbon dioxide level got to was 300 parts per million. We've already got it over 400 parts per million. It's between 400 and 410. So we've artificially increased the CO2 level massively by over a third. And that does cause the planet to warm up, undoubtedly. There's a big experiment going on just over the border into Staffordshire. It's called the Bifort Face experiment, run by Birmingham University. And what they're doing is, in 3 huge circular areas of an oak wood, they are enriching the CO2 levels in the atmosphere, in the forest, and they're then monitoring all sorts of factors in the forest, like how fast do the trees grow, what happens to the fungi in the soil, all sorts of things they're measuring. So they're trying to look forward to when we haven't just increased CO2 to 400 parts per million, we've increased it to 550 parts per million. Now, will the trees cope with those CO2 levels? Or will the trees actually benefit from the CO2 and mop it up and help with the problem? So that's what the Bifort Face experiment is all about. They'll be in difficulties at the moment because there's a massive shortage of CO2 and they need a whole tanker load every day. And of course the drinks manufacturers want it to go into all the fizzy pots, but Bifort Face deserve it more, I reckon, to keep this experiment going. So that's looking at the wood from some distance. And so, going back, can you see the pipe? That black pipe has little holes in it, and they're releasing the CO2 into the wood. Of course, it blows away, so you have to keep on replacing more. The experiment's costing £20 million, paid for mostly by a benefactor, by one Birmingham professor who made a pot of money from medical devices, and he's putting back by paying for this experiment. So there are 9 of those areas. In 3 of them, CO2 is being released. What are the early results? It's only just in the very early stages. Tree growth does seem to increase. But then quite quickly, the trees run out of nutrients from the soil. If the trees grow faster, they run out of phosphate and nitrogen from the soil. And so maybe we won't get greatly enhanced tree growth. It's a shame because what we really want is woodland to mop up carbon dioxide. But unless we fertilise or find some other way of enriching the soil, it could be that trees don't benefit from the CO2 rise. But anyway, I think this still leaves open the possibility that perhaps to help with all this problem of climate change and the weather being too hot and too much CO2 in the atmosphere, we ought to be planting more trees and establishing more woodland and maintaining the woodland like the woodland that you've got here. And so how could we do this? Well, this is where we turn a bit controversial, because you know that there are plans for much more extensive forestry in areas where you don't succeed in growing very much food. And so the areas that I suppose we look to are Highlands of Scotland, hilltops in Wales. I don't mean the good agricultural land in Wales, I mean the hilltops in Wales, where your stocking rate of sheep is very, very low. And so in Scotland, this project Trees for Life has been very active for some years, and I do support them. But in Wales, things are getting going as well. And it's this idea of establishing big areas of woodland that's as natural as possible, partly for the wildlife, but partly for absorbing CO2 and helping with these great climatic, planetary problems that we have. Now, do we have some farmers in the audience? I fear we do. Yes. Don't avert your eyes. Please do argue with me later. These are figures from DEFRA for a typical hilltop farm in the uplands. And what we learn from this is that if you're on this really poor land in the uplands, you actually make a loss on your agricultural operations. And what you're doing is only sustained by subsidy payments, in fact, and other enterprises. And so then this is controversial, and you may well disagree with me. Is that the best way then of spending this subsidy money on the poorest land? Or is this an opportunity, in fact, for more forestation with the environmental benefits that would bring? Now that's a question, and it's not me giving an answer, but it's a question. So we'd be looking at some of those really, some of the hilltops of Wales. Also, I think it's important to add that there's no way you would do this sort of policy as an edict that this has to happen. You would make it possible for this to happen where landowners wanted to do it. Maybe farms where there aren't people to take them on in the future, then more forestry or some rewilding could be done. There are great benefits from woodland. Your wood here will be providing them. I've put some down there. Less flooding, because you've got thicker soils that will mop up water. More wildlife, clearly. Lower subsidy payments, but you could simply transfer the subsidy for the environmental benefits. And this other thing that I've been talking about earlier, carbon dioxide, which if you've established this woodland, these woodlands should go on mopping up CO2 for long periods of time. And so this is a little bit of an example, because you might say, well, you're just shooting your mouth off about this, how about doing something about it? Well, I've done something on a limited scale, in our own wood, I suppose, but also I went up to, last autumn, to the slopes of Snowdon, National Trust land, and this is Sabine Nouvet, who's a French-Canadian, who's the National Trust ecologist in North Wales. And we spent a very happy day planting trees on this treeless landscape. Treeless landscape created by upland sheep farming. And what we were doing was trying to plant trees with a tree guard at the base, leaning out over a cliff, so that goats, sheep and whatever other grazers couldn't reach the foliage. And we planted about 100 in the day, in absolutely filthy weather conditions, but it was wonderful. It was great. Now, since then, Sabine tells me that the beast from the east has killed all the leaders on these trees, and as they're now lower down than they should have been, the grazing animals are seeing to the rest of them. So she said, I think I'll need you to come back again in November, December of next year, and we'll have to plant them all again. They'll be being hammered by the hot weather at the moment as well. But anyway, that's us with our bundle of goat willow or whatever it is we're planting up on the slopes of Snowdon, in a valley where the sheep have been taken off. In fact, they try and keep the sheep off that area. So that's one possible future that we can re-establish more of these wildwoods. And thank you for listening.
Yes, thank you.
Yes, of course, yes, yes.
Over to you, everybody.
You didn't mention, talk about ash an awful lot, but there's a lot of ash growing in this area. I don't know how that got introduced.
Oh, that spread naturally back. That would have been here 8,000 years ago. Yeah, no, that's a true native. On some of the better soils, at Brunedin it seems to be down the bottom edge, and it's in hedgerows as well, isn't it? It's a hedgerow tree in areas like this. So no true native, and there should be lots of genetic diversity. So I think it's got a much better chance of survival than elm. Where I'm sure you know the English elm was pretty much all one clone, and so if any of them were susceptible to the elm disease, they all were. So I think there are hopes that ash will be all right.
Do we assume that trees that we find are naturally self-setting in our gardens, they just suddenly, I mean, I've got 4 holly bushes
Yes.
that weren't there, and they now are thriving. Is that one that's going to frequently do well here?
I would have thought so. Yes, I think this valley is ideally suited to holly, and I think if your Brunedin wood was in a natural state, you'd have far more holly there. And I think it was almost certainly in the past, through forestry operations, it would have been roved out. I know it can be fed to livestock in the winter, and there's the holly orchard on stiper stones, but that wasn't widely done, I don't think, and so it didn't really have any function in woodland, and so it tended to be killed off to favour the trees that had some sort of use. But no, that should be around. I mean, from wildlife point of view, it's a really good thing to have. I would try and get more established in it. Would. In fact, yes.
The idea of planting trees on land which is agriculturally useless is very attractive, particularly when it's over the border in Wales.
Oh yes. Yes.
But I wonder what proportion of the land in the marches would be suitable for that?
Is the objection the agricultural incomes, or is it landscape? Just to clarify.
Well, I don't have any objection at all. I'm in favour of it, but I can see what it must be like from the farming point of view. It's one's livelihood which is at stake, really.
Yeah, but if this is merely a voluntary scheme, where I understand there are Welsh hill farms, really hard Welsh hill farms, where the offspring do not want to take over the farm. And what happens when you haven't got people who want to farm that land? You're remote up a valley. You're never going to make much money from the farming enterprises. In that situation, I think it should make it possible for reforesting that land. And from those figures are average figures for an upland farm from DEFRA, showing that on an average upland farm you actually lose money on the agricultural enterprise. So you're not really losing true agricultural income, actually.
Is it too simplistic to say it's above a certain level above sea level, for example?
So there's other factors, soil and rock types and other things.
Yeah. Because most of the hilltops around here are 300, 400 metres above sea level. Is that in the zone?
I think with these schemes you open it to any farmer, surely, don't you? And if the farmland is very productive and it's good to work, then carry on working it. But if you struggle and production is poor and difficult to maintain, then this is a very attractive other option. On the landscape front, people say, oh, but I don't know, Caradoc, we wouldn't want trees on Caradoc. Not the hill fort, but the hill near Church Stretton. But then you say, well, what about the Wrekin? That's already wooded. Do you dislike the Wrekin? And they say, oh no, we love the Wrekin, but we don't want trees on Caradoc. Wherever there's bracken, incidentally, there should be trees. Bracken is an indicator, that should be woodland. The soil is good enough for woodland, in fact. Now, if the bracken's immensely productive, agriculturally, then fine, leave it as bracken. But I don't know that it is generally. But I know I know I'm saying things that are potentially extremely unpopular, and I'm very much welcome counter-arguments.
Can you say something more about soil structures? Because I understand that in ancient woodlands, where the soil is undisturbed for centuries,
Yes,
the soil is very special and contains lots of microorganisms
yes,
and fungal connections that help the woodland to thrive.
yes.
It would follow from that it makes more sense, if you're looking to plant trees, to plant them on land that hasn't been subject to agricultural intensification.
Yes, but yes, I suppose so. It would be better, but I think we're not spoilt for choice in terms of sites like that. And we what's our forest cover? Is it 8%, something like that? It's very, very low.
In upland Wales, there are plenty of sites that haven't suffered intensification. Well, they've got the improved grasslands, but they're not usually the deep ploughing that we get on the arable land.
Where it's been intensively grazed, then there was a book in the New Naturalist system in the series written in the 1940s, one of the very first, called by Pearsall, and it was called Moorlands and Mountains, and he describes how the uplands have been impoverished in terms of their soils and their fertility through agriculture. So it's been going on a long time, and so you know, when you see these hillsides of just Nada stricta, it's not ecologically healthy. But slightly to challenge what you're saying, that area of larch that I showed you in our wood, which was planted in the 1950s, so Japanese larch grew on it for 60 years, all felled. When I plant trees on that soil now, and you think, oh, conifers, nasty acid needles, when I plant trees on that soil now, it's gorgeous soil. It's really fertile, and it's, even though it's on a steep slope, it's humus rich. I'm fairly sure to be roughly neutral. The humus goes down about that depth, and then below that, that's really lovely soil underneath. So I reckon that's a first-rate forest soil, and that's after just 60 years of tree growth. So I think maybe the story that only if woodland has been there for thousands of years is the soil any good, I don't know that I believe that really, and I think things can improve much faster, I suspect. Also, if you're doing this on a fairly wild basis, you just let the trees find where they want to grow. Stiper stones, Stiper stones is undergrazed. Do we all know Stiper stones, National Nature Reserve? Yes. It's undergrazed. The reserve manager's always having trouble getting a farmer to graze it sufficiently to keep the heather and to graze off the tree seedlings. And every place where sheep are less likely to go, tree seedlings spring up very quickly, even on those poor quartzite soils on Stiper stones. So trees will spring up quickly, and they will form close cover woodland almost everywhere. Only where it's bad drainage would I think you wouldn't get it. So no, I think you can go anywhere with a woodland. Yes.
What I was going to ask was, do you think our hand might be forced in the sense that, I know I hear what you're saying about drainage, but in order to stop the flooding or to try and prevent the flooding, we may be forced to plant more trees?
It's certainly a good thing to do. Yes, I think so. No, I think it's an extremely strong argument for reforesting the uplands. And I was on the doing some dragonfly surveying on the River Severn, just near Welshpool, and the water that's coming past, of course, is brown with silt. And in places you can see the silt snaking through the water, and of course you know all about your freshwater mussels on the River Clun being choked by silt, and that's it's all due to drainage problems. So yeah, yes, trees are really good for the health of rivers and for mitigating flooding downstream. So no, I agree with you. There's strong benefits, and also on blanket bog, because there are parts of the uplands which would naturally be deep peat, and that's been drained to try and get agriculture going or forestry going, conifers, and the drainage of the peat has caused excessive runoff from these hills, and so there's active work being done on that to try and block up the drainage on upland peat bogs.
Yeah, can I go back to your experiment about sort of planting, you didn't quite say anything and everything, but a real mixture
Yes.
from different parts of the country, different parts of the world.
your decision to do that and the way you're approaching it, is that sort of you on your own as an individual, or are you part of a movement, or is there a school of thought developing?
There is a bit of a movement going on, and the multi-millionaire who is paying for the Byford Face experiment has also planted 400 acres of new woodland on prime agricultural land in Staffordshire, to the consternation of his neighbouring farmers, and he's planted over 100 different